then put it in the exact case, case Z.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May 14th, 2026 meeting of the Memphis and Shelby County Land Use Control Board. My name is Mary W. Sharp, and I will be serving as your chairperson today. We will begin this morning's meeting with a roll call. Mr. Ragsdale, would you proceed, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Gill? Here. Mr. McKinnon? Mr.
Here.
Norman?
Here.
Ms. O'Connell? Mr. Orgel?
Here.
Ms. Wilbanks?
Here.
Vice Chair Lyles Wallace?
Here.
And Chair Sharp.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I would like to remind you that copies of today's agenda are located at the front right podium if you need them. If you wish to be a speaker on any case that is on today's agenda, please fill out the attendance speaker's card located at the front podiums. Once you have filled out the card, please bring it up front and hand it to one of our DPT staff members located at the left podium. When that agenda item is called, you will be given an opportunity to speak. At this point, I would like to read our conflict of interest statement. The adopted policy of the Land Use Control Board requires that any member of the board recuse himself or herself from any participation in the discussion or voting on any matter on the meeting's agenda in which he or she may have direct or indirect personal interest. The member shall vacate his or her seat during deliberation on any matter from which they have recused themselves. An abstention may substitute for a recusal for the purposes of maintaining a quorum. I would now like to get the approval of our minutes from the last meeting. May I please have a motion?
Motion to approve last month's meeting. Second. Minutes.
Okay, I have a motion and we have a second. Is there any discussion amongst our board members? Is there any discussion? We're hearing none. I assume we're ready to vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, do we have any director's remarks today?
We do not.
Okay, and I'd like to announce that last week was Mr. Ragsdale's birthday.
Thank
so
you.
Let us all wish him well on his belated birthday.
Thank you.
Congratulatory remarks. Mr. Ragsdale, may I please get a secretary's report for this month and an explanation of today's procedures?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a secretary's report, so I'll go into the procedure. At the beginning of today's meeting, we will establish a consent agenda for those items where no one in the audience or on the board is requesting an individual public hearing. After the consent agenda is established and approved, we will move on to the regular agenda. For each case on the regular agenda, the DPD planner will give a presentation. This will be followed by the applicant's presentation and any testimony from others who support the application. The applicant and supporters will be given a total of 10 minutes. Following each speaker, the chair will ask the board members if they have any questions for that speaker. Next, the opposition will be given a total of 10 minutes to present their case. Following each speaker, the chair will ask the board members if they have any questions for that speaker. Finally, the applicant will have a 3-minute rebuttal period under the same rules. Following all the presentations and after all parties have been heard, the chair will ask if the board members have any additional questions of anyone who spoke. Then the chair will close the public hearing portion of the case, entertain a motion on the matter, discuss, and then vote on the application. If an applicant or any speaker would like to be heard after the conclusion of the public hearing portion of the case, or if a board member wishes to hear any additional testimony from any party for additional clarification, a motion will need to be made along with a second, and then a 2/3 affirmative vote of the board is required to reopen the public hearing portion of the agenda item. If the public hearing is reopened, both the applicant and the opposition will be allowed an equal amount of time to provide additional testimony. After the additional comments, the board will close the public hearing portion of the case and deliberate and take the final vote. Again, if any member of the audience wishes to provide testimony in support of or in opposition to a case, he or she will need to fill out a speaker's card. These are available at the front podium. Speaker's cards are not required of the applicant since their names are already part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. The board is a supporter of community involvement, and we certainly welcome neighborhood comments and feedback. We're respectful of the fact that many of you have taken off of work or adjusted your schedule to be here today. But we ask that your comments please be made within the time frame allowed. If there are multiple speakers, please try not to be repetitive so as to make the most of your side's 10-minute time allotment. Lastly, I'd like to ask you to all silence your cell phones so as not to interrupt or disturb anyone during today's proceedings. With our procedures now explained, I would like to introduce to my right Ms. Lisa Wilbanks, who will be this morning's consent agenda chairperson. Ms. Wilbanks will read items 1 through 8 as the consent agenda. Once the consent agenda is read, if you wish to discuss one of these items individually, please come forward and give us the item number, and we will pull the case. We will then vote on the remaining consent agenda items as one vote, and following the vote, we will hear the cases that were pulled individually. Mrs. Wilbanks, would you please proceed?
Yes, ma'am. Item number 1, case SUP 2026-006 in Fraser. The request is a special use permit to allow a convenience store with gas pumps in the CMU 1 district located at 2999 Overton Crossing Street. Staff recommendation is hold for 1 month. Item number 2, case SUP 2026-007 in Fraser. The request is a special use permit to allow a convenience store with gas pumps in the commercial mixed-use 1 district located at 2627 James Road. Staff recommendation is hold for 1 month. Item number 3, case S 2026-010 in Westwood. The request is a 40-lot residential major located on the east side of Weaver Road, approximately 630 feet north of the intersection of Weaver Road and West Holmes Road. Staff recommendation is approval with 1 waiver. Item number 4, case S 2026-012 in Westwood. The request is a 7-lot residential major subdivision located at 653 Wilson Road. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions and waiver. Item number 5, case S 2026-016 in unincorporated Shelby County. The request is a 3-lot commercial major subdivision located at 1206 Tiger Trail. Staff recommendation is approval with conditions. Item number 6, case S 2026-017 in Whitehaven. The request is a 10-lot residential major subdivision located at 0 Richland Drive at the intersection of Davis Cove and Hester Road. Staff recommendation is approval. That is our consent agenda.
We have pulled items number 7. The items on the consent agenda will be voted on with 1 vote subject to the 7 and 8. Okay. The items on the consent agenda will now be voted on with 1 vote subject to the recommendation of the DPD. If the consent agenda is approved, only items number 7 and 8 will have full independent public hearings. By voting on the consent agenda, each board member is affirming that he or she has read the staff report and agrees with its findings and, where applicable, its recommended conditions. Can I get a motion, please?
Yes, ma'am. Move to approve item number 1, case SUP 2026-006 as a whole. Item number 2, case SUP 2026-007 as a whole. Item number 3, case S 2026-010. Item number 4, case S 2026-012. Item number 5, case S 2026-016. And item number 6, case S 2026-017.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion amongst our board members?
I did have 1 question.
Okay.
Yes, if it's on consent, then the applicant has agreed with all conditions. Yes.
Any more questions? Any more discussion? Okay, hearing none, I assume we're ready to vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. I will now go to Mr. Gill, who is on my left, for the regular agenda.
Thank you, Chairwoman Sharp. Item number 7, Z 2026-003, unincorporated Shelby County, rezoning of 53 acres from the Conservation Agricultural District to Employment District, located at 0 North Pisgah Road, south of the intersection of Houston Levy Road and North Pisgah Road.
Okay, would the applicant come forward? Please give us your name and address, and then we will hear the case from the staff.
Good morning.
Give us your name and address. and
Yes,
then-
ma'am. Dedrick Brittenham. My address is 3385 Airways Boulevard, Suite 229-38116.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll hear
ma'am.
the case from the staff before you make your presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is there any opposition per chance? Okay, we're ready to hear.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Nabanita Nira with DPD presenting the case Z 2026-003. The applicant is requesting a rezoning of 53 acres from conservation agriculture to EMP district. The subject property is located south of intersection of Houston Levy Road and North Pisgah Road. This is the location of the subject property. A total of 26 notices were mailed. This is a zoning map and land use map. As you can see, the subject property is surrounding uses are predominantly residential uses of apartment, single-family homes, and agricultural uses. This is the existing site photos. This is a plot plan of the subject property. The subject property has two street frontage, one Houston Levy and the other is Pisgah Road. With this upzoning to EMP, there will be additional industrial vehicular traffic compared to conservation agriculture district, which would be detrimental to the public good. Houston Levy Road is a two-lane minor arterial road serving predominantly residential and civic uses in the area, and Pisgah Road is a two-lane residential local street. Again, due to the existing nature of the surrounding uses near the subject site, including residential apartments, single-family home, agricultural uses, and upzoning to EMP is not suitable to the development pattern of this area. And also, under EMP zoning, a variety of industrial uses such as contractor storage, lumberyard, sheet metal shop, warehouses, tractor-trailer sales, fueling, adult-oriented establishment would be allowed by right. In terms of compatibility, these potential uses are not an appropriate addition to the existing residential and commercial uses. In conclusion, the staff is recommending rejection. This is the end of staff's presentation.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions of staff at this time? Okay, hearing none, we're ready for your presentation from the applicant.
Good morning, everyone. As I stated earlier, my name's Dedrick Brittenham. I'm here representing Leenow JV LLC and Mr. Bo Chambliss. We have a handout for the board, please, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, we're going to have a presentation, and Mr. Bo Chambliss will make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
He's the applicant owner.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Is there a way you could make that full screen? Okay, my name is Bo Chambliss. My address is 2436 Morning Sun Road, Cordova, Tennessee, 38016. So it looks like everybody's got a copy, so I'll go ahead and get started. So my name's Bo Chambliss. I'm the managing principal for Chambliss Capital. I'm with my zoning attorney, Dedrick Britnum of Britnum Law, and my partner, Chapman Brown. So today we're requesting a recommendation for approval of a straight rezoning of approximately 53-acre site in unincorporated Shelby County. So I'm going to outline a few elements of our application, familiarize you with the property, and address the conclusions that the staff came to. And ultimately, my goal today is to secure your recommendation for approval. Next slide. All right, so the request is, our vision is to create a vibrant, walkable employment and jobs district along the Houston Levee corridor, consistent with the purpose of EMP district. This approach aligns with the 1999 Shelby County Growth Plan, which describes agricultural zoning as a holding zone for future development and anticipates that employment centers will continue to move eastward and southeastward in Shelby County. Next slide. There are 2 points here. First is that Chambliss Capital is a locally based Memphis company. I live within a half mile of the property, and I'm going to drive past it daily with my family, and the proximity to the site should serve as an assurance that that the use will comply with the surrounding vicinity. Next slide. So a couple of physical features of the site. It's 53 acres. It has frontage on Houston Levee Road to the west, Pisgah Road to the east, and it is islanded by a high voltage transmission easement to the south, as well as an additional high voltage transmission easement across Houston Levee Road. And it has, and to the north, it is separated by the intersection of Pisgah and Houston Levee. Next slide. So the staff report describes the surrounding area as predominantly residential. With respect, that characterization does not fully align with the existing zoning pattern. An established employment district lies less than 1/2 mile to the southwest. Across Houston Levee Road to the west, parcel zoned Office General, OG, CMU, commercial mixed use, and EMP, or employment-oriented zoning, including heavy industrial on Lano Road, exists nearby. Residential uses are present, but are generally set back from the corridor with significant areas of vacant CA land and utility easement in between. Placing EMP zoning on this property continues an established pattern of employment-oriented development along Houston Levee, rather than introducing an outlier use. And so if you look at the map here, there are the rooftops are highlighted in yellow, and I've circled the property boundary from 750 feet from the border, and there are 0 single-family homes within that 750-foot boundary. You actually have to go out to 1,000 feet before you hit the first single-family home. Next slide. And so this slide addresses the traffic concern raised in the staff report with 3 points drawn from the adopted plans and public records. So the Memphis MPO long-range transportation plan identifies Houston Levee Road for widening from 2 to 4 lanes from I-40 to the Mississippi state line. This is adopted regional policy. The second point is Shelby County already owns a 108-foot right-of-way along the road, which is 54 feet from the center line, which would not have been acquired if the road were intended to remain 2 lanes. The county engineer's comments on this application require dedication and improvements at 54 feet from the center line, confirming the planned four-lane widening. The county's own planning documents and actions have long contemplated a larger corridor. This application aligns with that established direction rather than creating a new traffic concern. Next slide. Okay, so every major utility needed to support employment uses is already on or adjacent to the property. The power, there's a 500 kilovolt substation less than 1 mile away. A transmission line easement crosses the southern portion of the site. MLG water line runs along both Houston Levee Road and Pisgah Road. City of Memphis's Grays Creek sewer line crosses the property. MLGW gas pipeline with easement runs along the southern boundary. A large fiber optic easement runs along the west side of Houston Levee Road, and it has access to, it is minutes away from US 64, I-40, and 269. Next slide. So the nearest single-family residence is approximately 1,000 to 1,200 feet from the property line, as mentioned before. Between the site and those residences lies a substantial permanent natural buffer that includes Grays Creek with its 200-foot no-build setback from each bank, which is a minimum of 400 feet plus the width of the waterway, the 100-year floodplain to the west, mature heavy vegetation and tree cover, the high-voltage transmission lines, and intervening CA-zoned vacant land. Next slide. So these features are long-standing and will remain. Any development on the subject site will be located well behind this buffer, and the UDC requires additional on-site landscape buffers at the site at site plan review. While apartments to the north are somewhat closer, the integration of employment uses with multifamily housing is a common and successful pattern in Shelby County, as the next slide illustrates. Next slide. So here are a few examples. The Shelby County already successfully integrates employment zoning with both single-family and multifamily residential uses in multiple locations, including Macon Road, Leno Road, and Gillett Farms Parkway. These examples demonstrate that employment districts and housing can coexist effectively when appropriate buffers and contexts are respected. Residents increasingly prefer to live near where they work. Next slide. EMP district permits a broad range of uses. We are targeting those that fit the corridor and support compatible development. Office flex, light manufacturing, professional offices, self-storage, which has a notably low traffic generating use, research and development, logistics supportive flex space. The staff report references certain uses permitted under EMP, including adult-oriented establishments. With respect, adult-oriented establishments are prohibited within 1,500 feet of residential uses under the zoning code. Given the existing residential uses within that distance, such uses are functionally precluded on the site. More importantly, I have every personal incentive to ensure that only compatible, high-quality uses are pursued. Decisions about what is built there will be made by a neighbor committed to the long-term character of the area. All right, next slide. And so I want to address the points, the conclusions 2 through 4. Okay.
30 seconds.
All right. The Houston Levee Road is being widened to 4 lanes. All right. The next slide. So the economic benefit is It brings approximately 53 acres of idle greenbelt status into productive employment supporting use, transitions the property to bring in tax revenue for Shelby County, which will help widen those roads. And you can go to the last slide. In closing, we respectfully ask the board to recommend approval for case Z 2026-003. Because the corridor is being built for this, the infrastructure is already there, and a local steward will guide what gets built. Thank you for your time.
Thank you again. Okay, do we have any questions? Okay.
So, on your map where it has purple employment currently there, I'm not seeing where there's employment. If you go down from the intersection of Pisgah and go down Houston Levee, go south, it is residential neighborhoods on both sides. With
Those are
a
planned
couple-
development overlays on top of an EMP zoning. If you go to the zoning map,
Is there commercial use currently there? No, it's residential. There are a couple
Yes, ma'am.
churches,
There's
but I don't see any employment use. It's all residential.
no, ma'am, there's a 500 kilovolt TVA substation.
That, I would not consider that like an employment district. I mean, the way this is highlighted, it makes it look like this is all employment, where in reality, it's all residential.
No, ma'am, it is, if you go to the zoning map, it shows that it is all EMP, but there's an overlay, a planned development overlay on top of the EMP zoning.
So my point is, what exists there is all residential.
No, ma'am, if you look where Leno intersects with,
I'm talking about Houston Levee. So if you come to Pisgah and Houston Levee, you hang a left, you drive south along Houston Levee, or you drive right. You've got apartments to the right, you've got apartments across, you go down Houston Levee, and it's all residential with the exception of a couple churches.
yes, ma'am, those residential neighborhoods down there are about 1,200 feet away, which is a pretty substantial distance. I showed you in one of the slides how there is existing EMP and industrial uses that are directly adjacent to single-family homes and multifamily homes. And
On Houston Levee.
no, ma'am, not on Houston Levee.
I know, but that's why I'm saying this does not seem accurate to me.
Okay, so I think there's a misunderstanding. That purple to the left there is all along Leno Road.
Okay, so not on Houston Levee.
Well, so it extends over to Houston Levee Road. And is there a way to pull up the zoning map?
But my point is, this is not on Leno. This is Houston Levee and Pisgah.
It goes from Leno to Houston Levee.
If we look at what's adjacent to the subject property, it is all residential, whether you're on Houston Levee or on Pisgah. Yes, it is.
I don't believe that it's all conservation agriculture. There are single-family homes there, but they are at least 1,100 feet away.
On Pisgah, it's all single-family homes. On Houston Levee, it's a combination of apartments and neighborhoods of single-family homes, almost all the way to Macon. That is the condition. So I think this is very misrepresentative of what's there.
If I may address your concern, please, ma'am. I'd like to pass out to you and the board excerpts from the Unified Development Code, please.
I guess my point is, it's not what the code is, it's not what zones, it's what the actual conditions are as of today. And it's not employment. It is all residential along Pisgah and along Houston Levee until if you're going south to almost Macon and above, you're almost at 64.
Hey, guys, what are you planning to put here?
May I address
Go ahead,
Madam
you can.
O'Connell? Yes. If you will take a look at these excerpts from the Unified Development Code. The Unified Development Code, known as the UDC, has several provisions that provide for employment uses near residential. And these excerpts do that, particularly on page 117, school, housing, and employment proximity. Sustainable subdivision should promote public health through physical activity by facilitating walking to school and work. Encourage a diversity of uses and employment opportunities. The next page, at B, is highlighted, sustainable subdivision incentives, employment uses within a walkable distance. And the final page, on plan development at 4.10, at J, provision in attractive and appropriate locations for business and manufacturing uses in well-designed buildings, and provision of opportunities for employment closer to residents and with a reduction in travel time from home to work. This particular site is ideally situated for this situation, for this locality. And remember, this is known as the Houston Levee Corridor, and it's going to be developed at some point in the future. So this will be the first site, one of the first sites, that will have an employment opportunity for the people that live in this particular area.
Okay. Any further questions? Yeah, we still.
I just have one more thing to say about the walkability. I think a lot of your points here are cherry-picked from the Unified Code. I would say that both Houston Levee and Pisgah are not walkable, especially Pisgah. Pisgah is a very narrow, very windy country road. It would be, very dangerous to be walking along there. And Houston Levee right there is no walkable right-of-way, so.
Okay, thank you. We have another question?
Yeah, I was asking, what is the plan to go there, fellas? I hear you wanted to change the zoning and all that. What is the building? What are we putting there? What is the business? What's that? Do we have an answer for that?
Well, this is a rezoning for investment purposes. We don't have an end user yet. If we had an end user, we could answer that question. If you go to the slide deck, please, ma'am, that shows the potential uses, please. If you stop right there, let's talk a moment in sort of answering your question. Houston Levee Road at this particular location and throughout the north-south corridor of Houston Levee, it's scheduled to be widened to 4 lanes. And anticipation of it, increased activity and increased traffic and increased employment opportunities in the Houston Levee corridor from I-40 to the Mississippi state line. And I've got a handout to emphasize that as well. However, now if you go to the slide, please, ma'am, for the potential uses. Thank you. The highest and best use is favorable to the EMP for this particular site. And those are the types of uses that are anticipated that will go on this particular site. And all of these, except for self-storage, which is low traffic, all the others anticipate drawing workers and employees from the immediate surrounding area. This is a great opportunity for having employment in this particular location. To create jobs.
Okay, any other questions from our board members?
Do y'all develop yourself, or is just a rezoning to then sell to other developers? Just wondering from just a land use point of view. 'Cause I'll be honest, I don't have an enormous issue with any of these uses on this site. You are right that there's a TBA station on Leno. There's also a lot of EMP zoning over on Orange, which is directly south of this site. Residential uses have developed north of Houston Levy. But I don't disagree that this site, this is a problem with straight zoning, and we're about to deal with this a lot, especially if the DC changes. If we were looking at a PD right now, you'd feel much more comfortable because you would see specific uses, specific buildings, landscape plates. But what you're really responding to, Jennifer, I think, is the fact that it's a straight zoning, right? And I'm not regardless if you're for or against this particular situation, we've gotten very used to voting on PDs. And I think that this is a good example.
Well, definitely more clarification, but I was really taking issue with the way it was portrayed.
The portrayal, right.
It was, there was all sorts of employment districts right there, and that is not the fact. That is all residential.
Right, it is. It is mostly residential north, yeah, up to Houston.
Well, south.
Yeah.
South, all the way north and south, and directly across.
Yeah, I would say the intersections that Houston Levy has is kind of where the commercial nodes have happened.
It has been closer to Macon.
Yeah.
Not.
And 64.
Oh, yes, for
Yeah.
sure. 64.
But go back to my question. Do y'all develop ground up yourself, or y'all just planning on selling these sites?
Yeah, it depends on the highest and best use, really. I mean, we have use cases for both, but we approach the site with the intention to develop it ourselves.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
Madam Chair, Director Ragsdale is passing out excerpts from the MPO, and it highlights the Houston Levy corridor and the future plans for widening of Houston Levy from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, and in some cases with a median.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Do you know the scheduled date of when they're planning to do the 4 lanes?
Well, that information is probably in the MPO, sir, and I don't have, this excerpt is from 2020 to 2050, I believe, and you're correct. There are various stages in the MPO in which Houston Levy will have improvements. What is very important about the aspect of improvements to Houston Levy, the county has already acquired a 108-foot right-of-way along Houston Levy. So the county anticipates Houston Levy to be improved to 4 lanes at some point in the future. And this documents that it is planned for 4 lanes.
Thank you.
One thing I'll add is that it should be done yesterday. I mean, we've got 24,000 vehicles per day going on Houston Levy Road, which is almost half that of Germantown Parkway, and Germantown Parkway has 6 lanes, and most of Houston Levy is 2 lanes. So the traffic issue is already there. It's not like we would be adding a significant amount to it, and it really needs to be widened.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. That's all the questions.
I have a quick question for DPD, maybe for Brett. Brett, what would be, if this is a straight zoning, what is their process? Are they going to have to present 3 times and 3 readings to City Council after Lanes Control Board?
Yes, and this would be county commission.
Oh, I'm sorry,
It's in the
to
county.
County Commission.
Yes,
So they come through LUCV and then County Commission 3 times?
yes.
Got you. Under the new proposed changes, which we're going to hear next, what would be the same process?
It would be the same process.
Okay.
Any further questions? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to close the public portion of this case.
Motion to approve item number 7Z 2026-003 in unincorporated Shelby County.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Do you want to discuss? Board members, would you like to discuss?
Yeah, I'm not necessarily even looking to deny you guys. I definitely understand buying and owning and rezoning real estate. I understand that 100%. I think I would say more so nonetheless a hold, recommended a hold just for you guys to be able to kind of bring a little bit more depth into this. As we understand, this county is on their time. This road's not going to be improved. We barely getting potholes filled. So expanding to 4 lanes is not going to be a tomorrow thing. I think it's always a timing thing. I think if coming with a use like he said, I think we've seen a lot of PDs, where it's an exact use and we know what we're voting on. And this one is just a straight zoning. And I think if we were able to see something a little bit more solid, as we are investors and real estate folks, I think we know like, hey, highs and best use, we can build this, we can get this over, we can sell it, we can build this, whatever the case may be, we'll know how to handle it. So if you can give us a little bit more depth, my recommendation will be a hold. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Anybody else, any further discussion? Okay, do we want to entertain the recommendation, or do we just go ahead and vote on yes or no?
So he's got to get a second to his motion.
Okay. Since there's no second, then we need to go on and vote.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Norman? Ms. O'Connell? Mr. Orgel?
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Ms. Wilbanks?
No.
Mr. Gill?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lyles Wallace?
No.
Chair Sharp?
No.
Oh, and Mr. Thomas is here. Mr. Thomas?
No.
Motion fails.
Thank you.
Item number 8, ZTA 2026-001, proposed amendment to the Unified Development Code.
All right, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, board members.
Good morning.
It's a big day. We're here today first to give you a little bit of a timeline update. Am I on? Am I on? We're good. Okay. We're here first to give you a little bit of a timeline update on where we're at with the ongoing effort to update the Unified Development Code. And then we have some unfamiliar faces here. Our consultants with whom we've been working for about 2 years now, who will give the bulk of today's presentation. I'll warn you, it'll be a little longer than a typical staff presentation, but that'll be good to really get in the nitty gritty of what this new code is going to do, what the things we're excited about, and of course give you the ability to answer your questions, general detailed. So what we're going to give you today, first I'm going to get the boring out of the way. I'm going to give you a timeline and procedural update. We have somewhat of an announcement to make today regarding that. Secondly, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history, how we got here. All the work that's been done to get us to where we're at today and where we're going in the future. Then Chris Jeanette with Camiros, who's been our consultant for the past 2 years on this, will give the more lengthy, detailed presentation on the text. And then, of course, we'll move into public comment as needed. So as you know, we've been saying all along, we're going to ask you to vote on 3 documents, and that hasn't changed. One is the 5-year update to the Memphis 3.0 comprehensive plan. The second is the zoning code text, what we're going to talk about today. And the third is the zoning map. The sort of announcement we're making here today is that the first 2, the 3.0 plan update and the text, will appear on your June agenda next month for your recommendation. We're going to delay the zoning map to a future agenda. So the big thing to know today is that we're splitting the text and the map into basically two processes. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why that is and what the timeline for that will be. So why are we doing this? Why are we splitting the text and the map up? There's a few reasons that we have, gone back and forth and thought through, and we think it's for the best. One is it allows time for us to amend the map if there's a text change. If you all or the elected body make some change to the text, that may, make us think, oh, well, this could have an adverse effect on this neighborhood. We need to go change the map, right? So this gives us time to do that. The second thing is it allows us to do additional public engagement, which we're continuing to do, and we're looking forward to continue having more public engagement and conversations without delaying the internal work that's going to have to be done on the implementation side of these things. We have to update our fee schedule. That's going to take some time, especially there's a new state statute around that. We have to update our permitting software, and that's going to be more intense than just swapping out terminology. It's going to be a pretty significant lift to get that done. And of course, we have to train our staff. That includes both the office staff and our enforcement folks to really make sure that we're, hitting the ground running on this thing on day one. So what splitting the text and the map does is allow us to continue having that public engagement on the map without delaying these things. So that's the one thing. It allows us to offer folks predictability in map discussions. Folks come up to me today and they say, well, what would be allowed in RN2? I have to say, well, we're recommending this be allowed. By splitting the text and the map into separate processes, I can say this will be allowed and this will not, right? So as we're continuing these public engagement efforts, it allows me to offer predictability to folks. So that's sort of the third benefit. Additionally, you should know that the current Unified Development Code does not contemplate a complete repeal and replacement of the map. I'm going to get a little bit into the consequences of that and how we're recommending we move forward in that. So as you know, we've been clear throughout this entire process that we intend to repeal and place the entire zoning map. First and foremost, City Council asked us to do so in 2023. They passed a resolution asking us to do so. It's been, of course, over 70 years since we last did it. I think you all agree that it's time. I think your elected officials agree that it's time. And if you don't agree that it's time, I'd invite you to just go poke around the zoning atlas for 20 minutes, and then I think you'll be convinced that it's time. Additionally, as we've been working through this code text that Chris is going to talk about in more detail, it was written with the map in mind, and the map written, created with the text in mind. They really only make sense and really only do the job that they're supposed to do, integrated with each other. So we've been clear about that throughout this whole process. However, what is currently called a comprehensive rezoning in the UDC does not address replacing the entire map. It's intended for a much smaller geographic scope. Many of you were on this body a few years back when we did the Lamar Avenue comprehensive rezoning, really to address those auto-oriented uses around Lamar Avenue. That is sort of the current scope of what a comprehensive rezoning is under the UDC, a specified geographic area. It is not replace the entire map, right? In fact, our current language in the code explicitly limits comprehensive rezonings to planning districts or planning areas. That's an exact quote. So what we're going to propose to you is that a second zoning text amendment appear on your June agenda that will create the process for replacing the entire zoning map. That's a process that does not currently exist on the UDC, and so we're going to give you all the opportunity to sort of weigh in and set that process. So with that, our amended, that sort of begs the question, why now? Why didn't we do this a year ago? Up until this point, we had previously intended to pass the map and text as one combined document, one combined ordinance. We still contend that would be one of several appropriate approaches. But as I stated earlier, we've determined that it's in the best interest of sort of public engagement to split them up, and splitting them up has those benefits. And the answer is now we have this additional time because we're going to split the two up. Let's take that opportunity to create that process and clarify sort of the applicability of the current UDC to a complete replacement of the map. So the amended timeline would look like this. When the code update, which we're calling ZTA 2026-1, comes to you in June, it will have a recommended effective date of January 1st. The second ZTA, the process for adopting that map, will have a recommended effective date of immediately upon approval by the elected bodies. Assuming both of those things are approved in August by the elected bodies, that means we can target your September agenda for the map. That would sort of give us 4 months of wiggle room to set the map and seek approval from both this body and the elected bodies. Prior to your June meeting, we will have an updated draft for your reference as you're continuing to review the text, but of course, it will be September at the earliest before we bring it to you for a vote. So that concludes the process part. That concludes the boring. I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of how we got here before I turn it over to the folks with Camiros. So as you know, we adopted the Memphis 3.0 Comprehensive Plan in 2019. You should know that there are 14 distinct actions in Memphis 3.0 that direct us to update the UDC. So this is not something that, this is something that we have been planning to do now for over half a decade. We began on that effort really in earnest in the first half of 2023. I think we're all aware of what happened between the years 2019 and 2023 that made public engagement a little difficult. So we started in earnest in 2023. In May, we brought in a consultant, not these folks, a different firm. We said, hey, take a look at our code and tell us what you think's wrong with it. They produced a document in May. In August 2023, City Council passed a resolution, asked us to begin the process of replacing the entire map. That's what I mentioned earlier. And then in November of 2023, we began what we called subcommittee meetings. We brought together a group of stakeholders, diverse group of perspectives, gave them that code diagnosis document we got in May and said, hey, do you agree with this? What do you think? And we had those meetings in November of 23. That's when we really started saying, these are the things we intend to do and putting that in front of the eyes of stakeholders. Then we began the public engagement period for the Memphis 3.0 5-year update. Of course, those things are all connected. We've been, kind of ran a concurrent public engagement effort. That stretched from August 2024, all the way until March 2025. We held 42 meetings, 3 meetings in each of the city's 14 planning districts throughout that period. In the middle of that, in the fall of 2024, we first brought these folks here to Memphis, and we got in a van and we drove around the city and we pointed out things that are problems with them. And so that gave them the jumping off point to create a draft code that is Memphis focused, right? In April 2025, they published what we call the Drafting Directions Report. That's when we really made it publicly available. These are the things we plan to do. And in general terms, these are the corrections we want to see in the new code. In September, they got us a full draft. We began meeting with them 4 hours a week for over 6 months to really refine that draft and make sure every single line was something we were comfortable with and we felt like would be good for Memphis and Shelby County. We held what we call Workshop 4 in February of 2026. We had good attendance on that, right? So the Memphis 3.0 workshops we held in 24 and 25 were workshops 1, 2, 3. This was workshop 4. We had a little more, final recommendations to show folks and get their thoughts on. And then we published a map draft in February of this year. Now, when I say map draft, I want to be clear, it's not just the map. It also included basically the bulk standards and what uses would be allowed versus not. To be frank, 90% of what folks are most interested in the code. And we published that on February 13th of this year. So right at 3 months ago, right? In March, we held additional UDC update workshops after we had that map out and for folks to view. We showed it to folks. We got had great small group meetings with folks and, said, hey, we've got your neighborhood as this on the map. What do you think? Right? And then on March 27th, that's kind of where we are at today. We have published, as you know, on Friday, this past Friday, an updated draft, but the bulk of the code text that you're going to be asked to vote on in June was published on March 27th. So that's where we're at. As you can see, it has been really a solid 3 years of working on this process through public engagement, through, lots of staff hours, through the work of these folks here that are going to be speaking to you a little later. So with that, we're going to move on to their detailed presentation, but I wanted to pause for questions first before I turn it over to Chris.
I have some questions for, one, I'd like to applaud y'all's effort. I know, Nicholas, I remember over a decade ago being on the 3.0 original plan. And I think your goals are I think the goals, which we've talked about, you and I have talked about privately, of trying to bring density and specifically diverse housing stock into the core of our city is really a primary goal of this. I guess I'm more concerned a little bit with the process, so I'd love to ask you, and then we can hear the presentation. Let's say that this is passed. I've talked to you all a lot about how the process changes. What specific items will come to Land Use Control Board versus BMA? So if PDs essentially go away for anything under 10 acres, so 10 acres and over for PDs, I would assume straight zoning and special use permits. I think those three would all come to Land Use Control Board, and then on to City Council or County Commission, if that's correct. What else would not come to us, or I guess what else would come to us?
Yeah, so I'll let Chris get into the nitty gritty on that because he's prepared to talk about the process. But essentially, we've collapsed a lot of our separate approvals into really those three things. So I think you've pretty much encapsulated most of it. We, for example, have special exceptions today. Those will be going away. I'm trying to think of anything else. We've tried to really simplify the administrative flexibility as well that Chris will talk about. Right. So I think the three sort of approval types you talked about, we've collapsed them, all of our different approval types into those three things.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe we'll follow up with him because my concern is that as a developer, I have used the PD process for most of my career. So I'm having to change my thinking on that, which is understandable. But I also think that everything's going to go to BMA. I mean, BMA agenda, I think, is going to get very long because of just it is the only way that we're going to have any relief valve. So I just want to address those now so we can just talk about like how a process changed, and maybe the consultants can speak to it directly.
Sure, and I'll add one thing is I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at when I said that the code and the map really only makes sense in context of each other.
Right.
Because I do think a lot of the PDs we have today are a result of a bad map, right? And so with the map being fixed, let's say, our hope is that a lot of the need for PDs may go, or at least be reduced. And of course, I want to add too, before I hand it over to them, we don't have to get this right day one, right? We fully intend, I think, that we will have, let's give these things a shot, and we can come back in 3 years if something's not working, right?
Right. Well, so, just before, as we end this conversation, before we hear the next one, I think, Ben sits up here too as a developer. Our job is to assess markets and to respond to market. And I want to make sure, and something we've talked about privately, is that we've used the PD process not because I think not just because it's this ad hoc version of zoning, really just so that we can respond to market, right? And I think planning would like a little more proscriptive zoning ability so that we can find that balance between addressing the market and creating a product that planning can be proud of, the city can be proud of, and that we hope increases densities and does all the things that we want out of good development and good design. So that's all. I think those are the things that I'm thinking about when it comes to process around your plan. Sure. Thank you, Nicholas.
Yes, I just wanted to mention also, just to kind of clarify, I think Nicholas responded, with kind of some of the basics, but, there has been a lot of talk about, people are saying we're eliminating PDs and we're trying to not have any PDs, and that's just not the case. I think that what we're trying to do, we believe that the new text and the new map is going to reduce the need for PDs for sure, because we're getting things more accurate to what is on the ground and what we're trying to see. But we think that PDs are still a valuable tool, and I think that, and we can look, but.
Well, I agree with you, but how many PDs? I can think of 2 in the last 2 years that have been over 10 acres.
But I think that's only
Within
in
the
certain
city.
districts. I think,
Okay.
yeah, I think that's only in the MS districts. And again, that's where the map and the text really work together. We have to really think very carefully about where things are mapped and where the text is, and that's how they work together. So if it's only in the MS districts, for instance, then that is a very specific, and there may not be many 10-acre properties or any in some of these districts. And so I think some of those details are things that when we have more conversations with people, there's a better understanding of it, because again, there's a lot of discussion that is not necessarily accurate. And so we're working to clarify that, which was one of the reasons we requested this 1-month hold, and then the map discussion requested to delay that, because they really do work together. And so there's some of those that really on their face seem like a concern, but once we get into the details of how they work together, may not be as much of a concern. So
I have a question. So all of these emails, and I've read most of them, but most of them said the same thing, that we were rushing this. I was looking at that timeline. Is that really the case? I just want that addressed publicly, because there were a lot of people sending a lot of emails.
I think the timeline is, it kind of speaks for itself. That, well, part of it is we have been working on this for a long time, and our teams have been working hard on it. We all live and work in Memphis, and we care deeply about the city. We're not just planners that are coming in to try to tell all the people what you need to have. We live here. We've been doing this for 2 to 3 years. We have had engagement for that period of time. Some smaller groups in the beginning, specific committees that had a variety of people in those committees that represented varied interest, and then on into the more open public engagement. So we continue to have conversations, and again, that's why we're delaying this, because some of the people that we had engaged previously, and they haven't really engaged in some time, and they've come back in the fold, and we're having some good conversations, and some we've engaged with throughout. And so one thing I want to mention, we'll be clear about, we are proposing changes. I mean, there's no doubt. We've been working on this for 2 to 3 years, because we know that there are things that need to change. And that's what we've been working on, is what are those things that we think are important for the city to grow and to build back our core that need to change. And so we've made adjustments to that through these conversations, and some things we've backed from that we think still might be appropriate, but we know that a measured incremental approach is what we need, and that's what we think we're proposing. We're still willing to listen and change, but some of the conversations with some groups we're just not in agreement with. And so I think that we're happy to continue those conversations, but I think we will have things that we are proposing this, and this is where we think it needs to be, and we're going to need to just have that discussion, with the board here, and then with the elected bodies. So we're trying to minimize that as much as we can, and we're continuing to work on it to see where we can have agreement. But there are going to be some things that I'll just say that we're going to propose, and we feel like this is the answer, and we will look forward to the discussion. So we'll be working on it next month to minimize that as much as we can. So.
Anyone else before we go to the presentation? Okay.
Thank you. It's great to be here for the first time with you all. My name is Chris Jeanette. I am a principal at Camiros. I'm joined by Arissa Strungis, also a principal at our firm. Appreciate you bearing with through what is going to be a lengthy and detailed presentation about the UDC. So we're going to go on a little adventure together. We're going to start out with just a brief introduction, so what we're doing, what we've been doing. Then we're going to get into kind of the guts of the UDC, so how we're proposing that it be organized and structured moving forward, how we're going to deal with uses, the zoning districts that are included, all of the general development standards within the code, and then finally administrative provisions. So as you all know, the vision established in Memphis 3.0, the comprehensive plan, is kind of primarily implemented through some key tools. Two of those are the Unified Development Code and the zoning map. And we're here today to talk about the Unified Development Code. So Nicholas went through a lot of this, but some of the primary reasons why we're looking to update the code, it's old. Ooh, I didn't know this moved. Sorry. It is old. It was written decades ago. It has been amended in kind of a piecemeal fashion over time to address issues as they have arisen. And when we see additive processes like that, oftentimes those portions of the code that have been added kind of fall out of sync with each other. They add a bunch of bulk into the code, and over time, that just kind of leads to additional confusion. We want to make sure that we're improving the clarity and the usability of the regulations. So, updating the definitions, making sure that the code is organized more intuitively, adding in illustrations, just generally making it easier to understand, easier to work with, not just for members of the community, but also for staff who are administering it and anyone who's considering investing in the city or the county. And then also, as I've mentioned and Nicholas mentioned, policy alignment. This is a key tool for aligning the city's policies to the actual land use regulations around things like housing, economic vitality, mobility, and other topics. The UDC can be a key implementation tool. Also, just to kind of address, we have worked really collaboratively throughout this process with staff. We are national consultants. We work all around the country in communities large and small on zoning and development codes, but we know what we don't know, and we know that staff is kind of heir to the traditions of development in Memphis. Where all the bodies are buried, as do you all, I'm sure. And so we need that deep local understanding to really make this a product that's going to work for Memphis and Shelby County. This is the first time that you're seeing me here, but this didn't happen overnight. As Nicholas mentioned, we have been working together for 2 years. We started with a really intensive research, review, and analysis phase, moving into the drafting directions report that he mentioned that was released about a year ago. And since then, we have been working 4 hours a week, every Monday and every Wednesday and Friday. Sorry, I got my calendar mixed up there. To really walk through line by line, make sure everyone's comfortable with the approaches and that we think that everything that is within this draft is suitable and appropriate for the city and the county. It really prioritizes clarity and predictability over bulk. You can see there on the right-hand side, we've gone from about 542 pages to 315 pages and about a 45% reduction in word count. Just removing kind of a lot of the bulk that was in there, addressing things that really don't need to be addressed at this point in time. We have updated the terminology and the definitions just to make sure that the code is speaking in a kind of consistent language. And we've paired that with updated objective standards to kind of get out of the game of interpretation. When someone comes up to the development counter and asks a planner, can I do this? Maybe costs time, maybe costs money. So the code needs to be clear enough to kind of get us out of the game of having to try and interpret things and say maybe more than we can say yes or no. And then we've also added a number of diagrams and illustrations to help explain the standards. And just a quick primer, I do this every time before we kind of get into a detailed zoning presentation of the things that zoning can do and the things that zoning cannot do. So it can control the size, height, and placement of buildings on a lot. It can control exterior design elements. You all know this. It can control what types of uses are allowed on private property. But it can't control things like whether or when something actually gets built, the interior layout, design, or construction of buildings, who owns or operates properties or businesses, whether they're rented, owned, or condos, for instance, or operational elements that aren't related to physical development, so prices of goods, those types of things. Essentially, the message is that zoning sets the rules, but what happens depends on numerous factors. So Now we're going to get into a little bit of the content. So first, just the organization and structure. We worked with a number of key goals and principles in terms of reorganizing the UDC. So the first of those is that it should be a clear, logical structure. So we've reorganized the provisions in the code, and I'll go over that organization in a second. Making sure that we've clearly defined all the terms, that there's just one definition of everything, so that we're avoiding conflicts. Standardizing and simplifying measurement methodologies. So how do you measure lot width? How do you measure building height? Including those in one spot, making sure that they're clear and illustrated. Including illustrations and tables to really clarify some of the complex concepts that are in here and make information more accessible at a glance. And then ensuring consistency in terminology and voice. You know, as I mentioned, this is an old code. As things get amended over time, those amendments are written by different folks who might speak differently or use different terms, and so terminology can fall out of sync over time. And the rewrite process is a good opportunity to make sure that the code is kind of speaking in one clear, consistent voice moving forward. So it's organized as drafted into 8 main parts, and you can see those here. The first of them is the introduction, so this contains the title, purpose, and intent, kind of required legal language, what happens converting older districts to new districts, all of the definitions, all of the rules of measurement. So we're kind of establishing the language that we're going to use to regulate here in the introduction. And we get into the zoning districts, everything from residential through commercial, industrial, special purpose, and overlays. And then the third kind of bucket or part there is the uses. So what uses are allowed where, what are the standards that are associated with those. Then we get into site development standards. So you could think of this as everything that happens on a lot that's not the principal use or the principal structure. So things like accessory structures and uses, off-street parking, loading and access, landscape and sign regulations. And then we've got trees and open space, public realm and infrastructure, so sort of the nuts and bolts regulations there, dealing with those kind of physical realities. Then we move into the administration portions of the code, so who are the code administrators, what are their roles and responsibilities, what are the various application processes, what kind of notice am I required to provide, and then actual zoning approval and permitting processes would be in Article 23. Subdivision and right-of-way becomes Article 24, and then we move into how the code is actually applied. So what happens to nonconformities or things that don't meet the standards of the code, and how are the regulations actually enforced? All right, the use approach. So we have revised the approach to uses in the UDC. We've looked at all of the districts and all of the allowed uses, and really worked to make sure that we're auditing those so that the uses that are allowed in a particular district really meet and suit the function, form, and purpose of that district. We've maintained and enhanced the generic use approach. So again, continuing that move away from specific uses to kind of broader categories of uses that allow for easier interpretation as new uses emerge. You can kind of say, that's a retail goods establishment, or that's a personal service establishment, as opposed to that's a haberdasher or a cell phone store. And then we have made sure that all of the uses are clearly defined. So with a generic use approach, an important thing is to include what those uses do include, and then some examples of what they don't include, and we've been very clear about that. We've reviewed and updated use standards for a number of uses to address anticipated impacts of those. And then we've actually simplified the use approval process in a number of ways, which I'll go over later in the presentation. We've also added a number of uses to the code, just highlighting some of those here, some of the key ones. The first is a neighborhood commercial establishment. You could think of this as kind of a traditional corner store model. We can't call them corner stores because they're not always located on the corner anymore. So they're called neighborhood commercial establishments. They're really small-scale neighborhood-serving uses. So an interesting way to think about this use is that it's kind of a bucket that holds a small sample of other uses. So a neighborhood commercial establishment might be an art gallery or a small office or some other low-impact use that would kind of comport with the fabric of the neighborhood. They would be allowed within existing structures, on the ground floor of apartments, and as new standalone structures on corner lots only, where they're allowed, and they're not allowed in every district. Then we've built in some artisan and creative economy uses, things like craft industrial, commercial kitchens, and specialty food services, food truck parks, micro-production of alcohol. There's kind of a whole new series of uses in there that address kind of that more maker orientation. And then we've added some new residential uses as well. So pocket neighborhoods, which really deal with larger sites of at least 3 acres or more, allowing for a variety of housing, and depending on what district you're in, some retail uses as well. And then cottage courts, which are an important new one. And a useful way to think about these is that they would allow whatever sort of those base dwellings are that are allowed in the zoning district in an alternative orientation, right? So instead of along the face of a block, we're letting you kind of move into a site on smaller lots, or they could be all in kind of common ownership, organized around a central open space. So think about kind of smaller homes, smaller lots, organized a little bit differently, with design standards in there to make sure that they're context appropriate. And we have updated the approach to dwelling types, which is what this slide shows. These are the dwelling types that are included within the new code. Single unit detached, single unit semi-attached, which is one unit sharing a party wall with another unit that runs along a lot line. So they're each on their own individual lot. And we've got 2-unit dwellings, 3 to 4 plexes, townhouse, and apartment dwellings. We've also added kind of an updated a series of social service uses. The unfortunate reality of where we are in 2026 is that a lot of these are needed. Things like care homes, children's homes, reentry, and then shelters have been added and addressed comprehensively. We've brought in standards for things like solar energy and wind energy generation, and addressed temporary uses comprehensively. So things from farmers markets to farm stands to what I can do with my mobile food prep vehicle, also known as a food truck, and then temporary outdoor entertainment and sales events. And a whole series of accessory uses as well. So home occupations, what am I allowed to do as an occupation out of my home? Outdoor storage, outdoor sales and display. And we've updated the standards around accessory dwelling units as well. So moving into the zoning districts. Again, we have updated, simplified, clarified the structure of the districts. We have gone through each district and really made sure that the dimensional standards are working to acknowledge on-the-ground development patterns, that there's not a disconnect between what the code requires and what is actually built, and that those standards actually reflect the vision that's established in the comprehensive plan as well. We've worked really hard to eliminate some of the overlapping layers of regulation that cause confusion nowadays, so things like frontage types, streetscape plates, overlays, and we've built those considerations into the base zoning districts. Currently they can kind of pile up on a piece of land and make it confusing in terms of knowing what you can even do with that property. And so we wanted to simplify those, take the essence of what they're trying to control and improve the quality of development, and just build that stuff right into the base zoning districts. We have simplified the standards and the organization across all of the districts. So they're set up in a parallel structure. If you know where to find something in the residential districts, the commercial districts are set up just the same way, for instance. And then we've reduced the total number of districts through consolidation. So I mentioned that sort of initial period of research and analysis. A lot of that was taking what's on the books, comparing it to what's on the ground, seeing if certain districts are really generating different forms of development or if they're generating the same thing no matter where they're mapped. That allows us to kind of identify redundancies or identify gaps. And there were a lot of redundancies, so we were able to actually reduce the number of districts pretty significantly. Okay. The residential zoning districts. So these have been updated. We have consolidated the total number of them down from 12 in the current UDC to 7. We've updated, as I mentioned, the dimensional standards to make sure that the standards and the requirements actually match kind of the way that the neighborhoods within the city and the county are built. And we've added a series of new standards as well. So we're addressing maximum lot coverage, which is generally set at 80% for all of the districts. We're addressing minimum transparency. So how many windows do you have to have on non-residential structures? Blank wall limitations on non-residential structures. And then context-based setbacks. So your front setback in most of the residential districts is going to be based on that range established by the neighbors to either side of you if you're doing an infill development. And then we've brought in design standards that are tied to the specific dwelling types that address things like the orientation of buildings, articulation on their facades, the building materials that they're actually made out of, to make sure that we're encouraging kind of high-quality, context-sensitive development. So I'm going to walk pretty quickly through the palette of residential districts. We're going to do this for all the districts. I'm going to go as quickly as I can and try and make it as informative as possible. So the first is the RMP, the Manufactured Home Park District. It kind of does what it says. It allows for manufactured homes and manufactured home parks. Parks would require 10 acres minimum, and a manufactured home, kind of standalone on a single lot, would require 4,000 square feet, and they would allow 35 feet in height. The general rural is intended to accommodate those areas of the city and county that are really predominantly agricultural and undeveloped land, with some limited commercial and residential uses mixed in. It would allow single-unit detached dwellings on sites of 2 acres or more and 40 feet in height. And then we've got the RS, the residential suburban. accommodating kind of that traditional neighborhood environment, single-unit dwellings on quarter-acre lots. Single-unit detached would be allowed, as well as pocket neighborhoods that I mentioned, requiring a minimum of 3 acres and approved through a special use permit process. And that district would allow 40 feet in height. Then we move into the residential neighborhood districts. Kind of a useful rubric to think about as we kind of go through this list is that generally as we move up the ramp here, we're moving kind of closer toward the core of the city. So thinking about moving from sort of the rural areas into the more urban kind of core neighborhoods. So the RN1 would be predominantly single-unit dwellings on lots of 6,000 square feet. Single-unit semi-attached would also be allowed on 3,000 square feet. Additional housing options would be, again, that pocket neighborhood option, as well as cottage courts in the RN1, which would be a new use. And then 40 feet in height maximum would be allowed here. Within the RN2, we've got a mixture of single-unit and 2-unit dwellings with townhouses and 3 to 4-plexes allowed as well. 3 to 4-plexes in the RN2, importantly, would only be allowed on corner lots. Then again, sort of that limited palette of additional uses, cottage courts, pocket neighborhoods, and then residential co-living would be added here as well. This one would allow for 40 feet in height, except for 45 feet for townhouses and plex dwellings. In the RN3, we're looking at a mix of single unit, 2-unit, townhouse, 3 to 4-plex, and then introducing apartments to the mix as well. And again, sort of additional limited options, cottage courts would be allowed here as well. Pocket neighborhoods, residential co-living, and single-room occupancy as a new option as well. 45 feet in height maximum for this one. And then the RN4 is really intended to be the densest residential district, kind of focused more on apartment dwellings and 3 to 4-plex and townhomes. So really looking at sort of those multi-unit variations as opposed to single-unit dwellings in this one. It would allow 60 feet in height, except for 150 would be allowed for apartment dwellings. Okay, the commercial and mixed-use districts. We have updated these as well to make sure that they're really kind of effectively addressing the varied character of the commercial and mixed-use areas in the city and the county. We are distinguishing between those areas that are really kind of more auto-oriented or traditional kind of commercial development, and those that are focused more on a pedestrian orientation and walkable development. So we have made a shift in some of those districts that are more focused on pedestrian orientation and walkability to controlling things like build-to zones and build-to percentages to really require your building to be located a little bit closer to the street instead of requiring it that it be a minimum setback from the street. We've also, again, added context-sensitive controls on setbacks. So for instance, I'm only required to have a side yard in certain commercial districts if I am abutting residential. If I'm abutting another commercial development, I'm not required to have that yard. We've also addressed things like ground floor heights, blank wall limitations, and transparency standards, and then brought in design standards as well to, again, ensure that high-quality development. I also want to point out here that we've got those context-sensitive controls to ensure that transitions between the mixed-use and commercial districts to lower-intensity residential districts are really kind of handled sensitively. So we've got limitations on the height that you can establish within a certain distance of a residential use, and then that height kind of steps up as you get to 200 feet from that residential use. Okay, all of the mixed use and commercial districts, again, remember that kind of helpful rubric as we go up the ramp here. We're talking about kind of an increase in the level of intensity, development intensity that would be allowed. So we start with the neighborhood service district, the NS. This one is really small scale, pedestrian friendly mixed use, combining opportunities for residents to meet some of their daily needs through walking as opposed to getting in their car and driving. It integrates those uses into the neighborhood fabric and can often serve as an effective transition from more intensely developed commercial areas and established residential neighborhoods. Then we've got Main Street, so Main Street 1. This is the first of the 3 Main Street districts. And as we go up, they kind of ramp up in intensity and height that's allowed, as well as the mix of uses that's allowed. So this one fosters a walkable mixed-use development in kind of that neighborhood context, supporting local business and creating those vibrant destinations within easy walking distance of where people live. Allows 50 feet in height. Main Street 2 really serves as an activity center for neighborhoods as well as the broader community, so reaching out a little bit farther from my market there. Again, in a pedestrian-oriented environment, allowing a little bit more urban scale development, so think a little bit more height, a little bit more intensity. It would allow about 80 feet. And then Main Street 3, so 160 feet in this one, significantly larger, significantly kind of more active, walkable, getting at that kind of 24-hour mixed-use environment. And these areas would typically be well-connected and accessible via multimodal transportation as well. Then we get to downtown, really the highest intensity mixed-use core of the city, emphasizing that active realm for public living, reinforcing downtown Memphis as a regional destination, and allowing for unlimited building height downtown. Then we've got the campus district, which addresses kind of larger institutional users, things like healthcare campuses, educational campuses, even corporate campuses, allowing for a broad mix of uses to kind of support those institutional anchors, and really thinking carefully about how they meet at the edges with their context. So oftentimes allowing a little bit more flexibility on the interior of a campus, but what we really care about is kind of where the edges intersect with existing development. And that one would allow up to 125 feet in height. And now we've got kind of the more traditional or corridor or auto-oriented commercial districts. So the first of those is the general commercial, a pretty broad range of retail, service, and commercial uses mixed with some residential in here along local commercial corridors. It really acknowledges those existing auto-oriented patterns and allows for flexibility and scale to meet kind of the conditions in various areas throughout the city. That would be a 50-foot height maximum in that one. With the regional commercial, again, kind of is what it sounds like. Those larger regional users, think kind of the big box retail stuff, right? So these would serve multiple neighborhoods as well as attract potentially a regional market. And the standards within that district really address that auto orientation, focus on managing the impacts of the scale of those types of uses. Importantly, the CR would be the only district here that would allow for new fueling stations, and this one would allow for 50 feet in height maximum. Okay, now industrial zoning districts. Again, we've updated the structure to really focus on supporting the continued viability of industrial areas within the city and the county. We have added, again, context-sensitive controls to things like setbacks and building height to make sure that where these uses go in, they are really being context-sensitive and addressing adjacencies. And we've created a new district, the Employment Mixed-Use District, which would contain design standards to encourage high-quality development. This is an interesting district that I like a lot. Really kind of gets at those areas within the city that are transitioning from kind of pure industrial use to seeing other uses start to encroach. Dog daycares, CrossFit places, breweries kind of creep into these areas, right? They can be mixed with some residential uses. And so we want to get at good design standards to make sure as buildings are being reused, they're doing so thoughtfully and that new development also matches that context. So I just talked about the Employment Mixed-Use District. It's a blend of a bunch of uses with sort of that light industrial edge, and it encourages adaptive reuse of some of those older character-giving industrial structures. It would allow up to 60 feet in height. And then we've got the light industrial and the heavy industrial districts. So these are really dealing with impacts of uses. So a good way to think about the light industrial is that it's lower impact stuff, warehousing, distribution, and generally things that occur within an enclosed building that aren't going to impact their neighbors significantly. It also allows for complementary retail and service uses for the people who are working in the area and allows 80 feet in height. And then the heavier industrial, or the HI, the heavy industrial, this would be higher impact stuff, so those uses that are more likely to generate things like noise or vibration. And the standards really focus on supporting that kind of industrial core activity while making sure that these are buffered appropriately and located in the right places. It would also allow up to 100 feet for those more intense industrial uses. Okay, how's everybody doing? All right. So now moving into the special purpose and overlay zoning districts. As you are familiar with the current code, you will notice in the draft that most of these have gone away. Most of the special purpose districts, even the sub-districts of the SCBID and the Uptown, have been consolidated into this base set of districts that we're working with. A lot of those special purpose districts built in extra layers of design, maybe things about where parking could be located. And what we've done is we've taken those elements out and just built those into the base requirements, which has allowed us to reduce the number of special purpose districts. We've also done the same thing with overlay districts. We've brought some of their key considerations into the base district standards. really only retaining those overlay districts that do what overlay districts are intended to do. And that's addressing kind of unique geographic considerations, operational considerations for things like the airport, or environmental considerations, where you want an overlay to go over, for instance, a wetland. So the special purpose zoning districts that we have retained in the code are the Parks and Open Space District. This one is a consolidation of a couple existing ones into a new district that really addresses how parks and public land are treated. And then the Floodway Zoning District, which applies to land within the designated floodway. In terms of overlay zoning districts, we have maintained the ones that kind of meet the purpose of overlays, as I mentioned, which is to address kind of those unique features. The first of those is the Historic Overlay District. We have maintained that one largely unchanged. The Airport Overlay District, also unchanged. And then the Floodplain, Fletcher Creek, and Wellhead Protection Districts, which have seen kind of minor updates. Okay. So general development standards, again, this is everything on the site that is not the principal building or the principal use. So we're talking about things in these sections like generally applicable standards. So how many buildings can I have on a lot? What do I do with a flag lot configuration or a double frontage or through lot configuration? What about development on lots that are not served by public sewer? So all of those considerations are handled through here, as well as kind of functional things like clear sight triangles, making sure that visibility is maintained at intersections. We brought in and updated some exterior lighting controls. So a lighting plan would be required now for non-residential, mixed-use, and apartment dwellings. This deals with kind of basic elements of lighting, making sure the fixtures are full cutoff so we're not kind of increasing light pollution, requiring that they have a correlated color temperature that's on the warmer end of the spectrum and avoiding some of those blue light issues. And then we've dealt with height limitations for luminaires on private property as well. So 20 feet in non-residential districts and 15 feet in residential, with exceptions for things like emergency lighting or recreational field lighting. We've brought in a new series of standards that address fences and walls, so everything from how they have to be maintained, what side the finished side of the fence has to face, what materials it can be constructed out of, where it can be located, how high it can be, and how they need to be designed. Okay. We've addressed everything. Refuse and recycling containers. Not your personal ones, but larger ones. Where can they be located? How do they need to be screened? Permitted encroachments. So a useful way to think about these is that they're architectural features like balconies or bay windows or decks or things that would encroach into a required setback. If we want interesting architecture, we have to be intentional about how we're allowing things. So this table on the right-hand side here specifies where features like that would be allowed to encroach and how far into each of those setbacks they can do that. And then we've also brought in a series of general performance standards, so limitations on noise, glare, heat, vibration, dust, electromagnetic interference, and those types of things. Moving into accessory structures, we've updated the series of general standards around these. So, carrying forward a lot of the current ones, they have to be 5 feet from interior side or rear lot lines. Detached structures are generally going to be prohibited in your front yard unless we're dealing with something like accessory structures to an agricultural use, or if you've got a larger site with a front setback that's more than 100 feet, for instance, in the GR district. They would be limited to 22 feet in height unless they're specifically exempted from those limitations, and they couldn't exceed the principal building footprint. We've also brought in standards for a series of specific structures. So what do I do if I want ham radio equipment? What am I allowed to have? If I want an apiary or an arbor or a carport, what are the standards around those specific accessory structures? And we've built in a broad range of those. In terms of parking, loading, and access standards, we have evaluated and updated parking ratios. Generally, that means that we have reduced parking ratios. We have required EV parking in certain circumstances, so electric vehicle charging infrastructure, distinguishing between EV-capable spaces and EV-installed spaces, and requiring those where people are going to be leaving their cars for long periods of time. So uses like parking lots or parking structures as a principal use, hotels, offices, and then the residential component of mixed use or apartments only when you're doing a larger lot. We've expanded minimum bike parking requirements and updated the bike parking design standards. And we've brought forward kind of the existing palette of exemptions, reductions, and other flexibilities with some limited updates as well. So you still have district-based exemptions where parking is not required. You have district-based reductions where you get a 50% reduction in your required parking. And a couple new ones, an adaptive reuse flexibility. So for those buildings, again, to encourage reuse, for buildings that don't currently provide parking and don't have room to provide parking, we're just going to exempt you because land doesn't get made out of nowhere, right? And if we want to encourage reuse of existing structures and bring them back onto the tax rolls and get them into productive use, we don't want parking necessarily to be standing in the way as an obstacle of those. And then a reduction of 20% would be allowed if you provide a cross-access easement between your parking lot and the parking lot of a neighbor or use next door. We've also addressed landscape comprehensively. So all of the landscape provisions have been brought together and consolidated into the new Article 14 with a couple key updates. So a landscape plan would still be required, for non-residential, mixed-use, or apartment dwellings, or any parking structure or parking lot. An important change, too, rather than kind of a simple trigger for requiring the plan to be prepared by a Tennessee registered landscape architect, that would now be based on the complexity or scope of the project. So we would allow for others to prepare those plans depending on the complexity and scope. We have brought in a series of plant material selection standards, installation standards, and then maintenance standards because landscape is really treated as a site element that has to be maintained the same way as your lighting, for instance, or your parking. We've brought in species diversity requirements, so you don't create a monoculture that's really susceptible to a disease that's going to wipe out all of your landscape, but rather we're requiring that you've got some diversity in terms of the plant material that you're putting on your site. And we have addressed all required landscape comprehensively. So parking lot perimeter landscape, parking lot interior landscape, and buffer yards have all been looked at, updated. Okay, signs. We have really simplified and streamlined the signs section, updated and simplified the measurement methodologies, organized generally the section into signs that are exempt from a permit or that don't require a permit, and then those signs that do require a permit. We've addressed illumination, maintenance, as well as the CBID sign review process for areas within that geographic location. And then we have updated all of the regulations to make sure that they are content neutral and in alignment with recent Supreme Court decisions. I'm still saying recent Supreme Court decisions, even though Reed Gilbert was, I think, 10 years ago now, but there have been others that have reaffirmed over time sort of the time, place, manner approach and moving away from content regulation. So if you look at that section, you'll see that we've addressed all of the sign types comprehensively. There's illustrations for each one of them so that you know exactly what we're talking about. And I've just listed some of the sign types there that are addressed. In regards to trees, open space, and the public realm, we have updated and simplified tree protection standards. So moving away from that tree removal matrix that's within the current code that establishes different thresholds for various zoning districts, and just gone to a 70% interior limitation on your tree removal before you start to trigger replacement or payment in lieu. And we've introduced kind of a woodland area requirement. So in those portions of a site that have 60% canopy coverage, we don't necessarily need you to go out there and counting trees, but rather we can address those as a woodland area with some specific provisions around those. And we've also maintained and clarified things like the stream side management zones that are in there, stream buffers, steep slope protection, and stormwater management. In terms of open space, we have moved to a 20% common open space requirement for any new majority residential development of 15 acres or more that's a PD, or that's in the general rural or a residential neighborhood district. We've got open space requirements classified into 3 different categories, so primary, secondary, and tertiary, depending on kind of the features that are included within each one of those with different requirements for them. We've required that at least 40% of the open space that you're providing be contiguous so that we don't get kind of a fragmented patchwork of stuff, but rather we get an actual usable open space. And then we've also addressed maintenance of open space, including what happens when someone fails to maintain their required open space. We've also brought in a series of public realm standards. So these continue to address the things that these sections kind of do today: connectivity, block design, what bicycle facilities are required, street tree requirements. But we've also brought forward a series of 10 kind of cross sections or street types And these come out of Memphis 3.0, and they're tied to a street types map. So where the street types map indicates that a particular type of street is required, you would go to this section and see what the requirements are. So we have addressed a number of street types, all the way from alleys to multi-lane boulevards and avenues. And an important thing here is that the city or county engineer can modify any of these standards to make sure that the streets that are coming in will work in the context. All right, we're almost there. Administration. So we have reorganized the administration sections of the code. They are code administrators, which is Article 21, application processes, which is Article 22. We have added a specific section in there that clarifies the applicability of the Vested Property Rights Act. Zoning approvals and permits is Article 23, and then subdivision and right-of-way approvals follows that one. So the code administrators that are identified include the governing bodies, you all, the LUCB, the Board of Adjustment, and you can see the rest of the list there. That section includes kind of roles and responsibilities for each one of those, situations in which, for instance, you all would review and recommend or be responsible for a final approval. The application process article identifies the initiation authority, so who can put an application into process. It deals with the required pre-application conference with the zoning administrator, neighborhood meeting requirements, what types of notice are required for specific applications, and how that notice works. And then again, vesting, as I mentioned. And you can see a sample of the required notice table there for various applications, the types of notice that are required. Really simple. In terms of administration, we have dealt with all of the various zoning approvals and permits. I'm not going to read down that list. It's pretty lengthy, but everything from text and map amendments to special use permits to certificates of occupancy and time extensions. An important change with special use permits. We have consolidated the current conditional use and the significant neighborhood structure conditional use. Those were kind of parallel processes to the special use permit, so we've collapsed them down into one. It's a single process. Special use permits would go to the zoning administrator for a review and recommendation, and then move to the land use control board for a final decision. They would be appealable to the governing body. And then administrative modifications have also been updated. This is kind of based on the current administrative deviation process, and it would allow for the zoning administrator to modify any standard, any dimensional standard in the code by 20% or less, or to modify other standards that are specifically addressed within the code. So again, sort of those lower thresholds, we don't necessarily want to be pushing you into a variance. It's a relatively small change, and letting those be approved administratively by the zoning administrator. If the zoning administrator decides that something kind of rises above the level or above the threshold of things that should be approved administratively, even if they're below the threshold, they can be elevated to the Board of Adjustment, even if they meet the standards. And those would be appealed to the BOA as well. Okay. We have included a series of updated flowcharts that are detailed and a little bit more accurate to kind of guide you through exactly what happens in each one of these processes. Please don't try and read this. You can zoom in when you look at the actual PDF. And then finally, subdivision and right-of-way approvals. Again, some significant changes here as well. We've gone from 3 different types of subdivision, the standard, the open space, and the sustainable options, to a single subdivision that moves through a single process. So we're not distinguishing between minor and major subdivisions any longer. Rather, it's one single subdivision process that consists of a pre-application conference, submittal of a preliminary plan that's reviewed by the zoning administrator, who can convene the technical review committee, and then the zoning administrator actually reviews and approves those preliminary plans. And the final plat, if it's consistent with the preliminary plan and doesn't require any public improvements, then the zoning administrator can approve those as well. If they do require public improvements, they would be directed to the governing bodies for final approval. And then finally, nonconformities. So we've addressed a whole series of nonconforming situations here. Nonconforming uses, those can continue unless they're abandoned or discontinued for a period of a year or longer, which is the current approach to those. And we've also dealt with nonconforming residential uses. So this is kind of an exciting one that we think is a good approach. If I've got, for instance, a dwelling type that is no longer allowed in the zoning district, we're going to deem that dwelling type conforming, meaning that it's not considered non-conforming. It's allowed to continue, and it's not subject to non-conforming provisions. There are a whole series of standards around this related to improvements that I can make. If I essentially take a duplex and make it a single family, I can't go back to a duplex if a duplex isn't allowed. And so there are guardrails on that as well. And you can't create additional units, importantly. Then we've dealt with non-conforming structures, so clarifying the maintenance and alteration provisions around those, and kind of keeping the current threshold of 75%. So if you are damaged or destroyed to less than 75% of your current market value, then you can rebuild if you apply for a building permit within 1 year. And if you're destroyed to an extent of 75% or more, you're required to rebuild in conformance with the code. Non-conforming lots, again, kind of continuing the current approach, allowing those to be used for a single unit dwelling in any district that allows for a single unit dwelling. And then also addressing non-conforming signs. So continuing the requirement for an annual license update, and allowing those to remain in use as long as they're otherwise legal. And again, that 75% threshold. They can also be relocated on the same site. So with that, we have made it to the end of the presentation. I know it was lengthy. Thank you all for bearing with. And now we're just kind of happy to have a discussion and address any comments or questions you all have. Start over. I mean, if you all really want me to, I can do it.
There, you got him. You got him. Oh, no.
Testing, testing.
This one works.
Want me to go without the? Is it working now? There we go. Hello.
Have it, and
Great presentation. Thank you for your time. And I know it's been 2 years of hard work. And I think you and I personally spoke about this, but there's some disconnect. And while this presentation is great, it looks great, and I do think we need to do something.
Try it now. Hello. Okay, there we go. Why do you want me to start over or? Okay. So this is more of a comment than a question. And while the presentation was great, thank you so much for your time and your staff for the last 2 years, and Brett and your team. Thank you. So, I mean, I know this is a big process and we need to do something. I'm not saying I'm for or against this at all, but there's some disconnect in the community and what the city is and county is trying to do with this, because I think everybody was copied on the same emails. I think we got 300 to 400 emails over the past 2 to 3 weeks, and I've gotten a lot of personal calls from people that are in real estate development, architects, you name it, attorneys that we see up here, and there's some disconnect. And I don't know how there's a reason there's so many people against it, and we have not received any emails for it. And like I said, I'm not for or against it. This was very helpful, but that's my thought process at this point. We need to figure out how to narrow that down and get the community to understand why we're doing this, while I know you're trying to do that.
Yes, and I know that there are lots of questions. I'll just say we have been having a lot of those conversations, and when we have the conversation, we come to an understanding. I mean, there are just some that we are not going to come to agreement with, and that's the majority of the emails. And I know a lot of these people personally, and we can continue having those conversations. But in the end, there are just certain things that we're going to propose, and there's not going to be agreement on.
And I absolutely understand that.
Respectfully, hopefully.
Absolutely.
I'm in the same position, and I'm wanting to propose what I hope is a small way of bringing a solution to the table, which is this. We had a very similar process in the Binghamton community over 15 years ago, where we had to do a community charrette, where we brought the stakeholders and the powers that be in the redesign of the community to lay out, the future. I think if we had visuals that were available to us, a limited time frame, and some guide rules, a venue where we could at least be in the same space to hear, because reading the emails, I seem to get a passion from one side of it that appears that even if we move forward, we're going to be challenged legally. And I'm wondering if that's just going to present more challenge further down the road. I think we can knock a few of the hurdles out of the way if we just had that space. And I would recommend.
They've been having meetings.
Yes.
Hundreds of them.
Hundreds of them. Okay, well, that's the piece.
I mean, I could offend you there. I went to a couple of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we're continuing to have them, and so I appreciate the comment, and we will continue to have them. And I do, there are some points that, we have graphics available, and we have certain things. We have had attendance from some of the opposition at some of these meetings. So we've had those spaces and those opportunities. Not to say we're not going to continue to do it. I think, we want to continue to do that. And in the end, reduce as many of those hurdles, come to as many compromises as we feel is appropriate. And again, I think we've really brought this to a point where we think we've compromised to the point we think this is the right approach, the right proposal to move forward with. And so we're going to continue having those conversations. So I appreciate that.
Any further questions?
I have a question,
Okay,
too.
Go ahead.
I think this is fantastic. I am all for it. I think it was incredibly comprehensive. I had gone to your website and looked at all of your other projects. So I don't think this was done without tremendous consideration. I think to have more clarity, to have more structure, to have less wiggle room in our rules for development here is a wonderful thing, so that you wouldn't have a situation like, say, what happened earlier, where they took the UDC and they cherry-picked it, and they're like, oh, this is a walkable area, and in a space where clearly, that's not the intention of the area. It's not, what makes sense for that type of development. So I think the more structure, the more clarity, the better and the smarter the development for Memphis is. So I really applaud all of this effort.
Anyone else?
Yes. Chris, thank you. Great presentation. As y'all have worked all over the country, you've done small area plans to full ordinances for cities. I have to think that as you would tend to kind of you kind of figure out what works and doesn't work, and you tend to repackage those things for different municipalities. I think that's a normal human thing and part of your business. In what municipalities could you give us examples of where you all have done a similar plan? We are a tertiary market at best. We've hadn't had any growth in the city of Memphis since 1970. Sure. We have no job growth. We have a failing school system, and we had bad crime. That has hopefully been corrected here recently. I guess, can you give us examples of where y'all have done this around the country? Because I've looked at y'all's website, and you've been really proud of the result. And the municipality has really implemented it well. And you've seen developers and the market respond positively to it. And some occasions maybe where it hasn't worked.
Sure. I'm going to invite my colleague Arista to come up here if she has any examples too, because she's been doing this a little bit longer than I have. I can think of a couple more recent examples of kind of similar places, and I just jotted some down. We worked in Shreveport, Louisiana, a number of years ago, kind of similar market, as well as the city of New Orleans. But Buffalo, New York is an example that I'm thinking of. So I think that one was adopted in 2017. It was one of the first ones in the country, did away with parking minimums all throughout the city. There was big change, big public process around it, and it's been, I would say, embraced by the development community as well as residents who are kind of seeing projects start to happen at a pace that wasn't really realistic before. And I think a lot of what you see with something like what we would hope to do here in Memphis and Shelby County too is like looking at all of the regulations, looking at the administrative processes, and kind of the burdens that a lot of this stuff impose on a development process, making it a little bit more fair, leveling the playing field, making development accessible to not just big national developer crop, but also kind of a more local developer crop. And where we've seen kind of projects be a little bit more embraced and successful in the closer term are where we're allowing for those sort of more incremental development options and not setting up a framework that really just favors large, big unit count kind of developments. Anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say too, kind of the question of where they haven't worked. There's really no place they haven't worked. These are the rules and regulations for development. So if development is not occurring, we've worked in places that are really struggling, like Trenton, New Jersey. We did a code there. It's not just the rules. It's not the land development regulations. It's other things going on within the city. I mean, we just want to set a table. I think Chris even said it in his presentation. It sets the table to invite people to come and develop. And where we've seen a positive response is where, as he's been pointing out, all those burdens and all those things that you don't need to have to do are gone. And that way, you come to find out who's looking at you. Because oftentimes with the zoning code, when it's old, when it's got a lot of problems in it, there may be people that are looking at Memphis and they look at the code and they go, no way, I'm not dealing with this. I'm not going to do this. And you don't know who's walked away from the table at this point. So that's really what we see in our work. True zoning stuff, there's always the saying, 20 years from now is really when you start to see the zoning, real big changes from zoning. But incremental ones happen along that time frame.
So within what you guys have done in Shreveport, Trenton, New Jersey, Buffalo, have you seen or received any responses back saying, man, we have an overwhelming group of folks that come in and developing now?
No.
That's generally not how it works. Now, I mean, it's not kind of like a flipping a switch and suddenly the developers are there. Because a lot of times you have to cultivate a developer crop, right? That understands the code, that wants to kind of work with the regulations that you're dealing with. So it's not going to be like flipping a switch and you're going to see tons of interest in development. The hope is that we're just making the process easier, and so over time, folks will start to realize that and be more willing to engage. And I also just wanted to add to a lot of the recent stuff that the city has been doing in terms of building code updates and dealing with, stair requirements and sprinkler requirements. Those are kind of an additional hurdle that you all have already jumped. So the zoning is kind of a follow-up piece here that's really going to enable a lot of those changes to happen throughout more of the city.
Any more questions? Any more questions? Okay. Go ahead. Are we?
Nicholas, did you want to add anything? Madam Chair?
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit of color to what Chris just said. If you didn't know, we in Shelby County recently went through a long, protracted process to provide alternative fire safety measures for 3 and 4-plex buildings, not require sprinklers, right? So, for one, the impact of that hard work that we did is, number one, reduced if we don't allow them more places, which is what we're trying to do here. The second thing is it's just a good example of the zoning just being one piece, right? There's hundreds of people who work in this building every day who their job is to bring development back to Memphis. The zoning is one portion of that. So I think that sort of sums it up and gives a good example of, this is a part of what we're trying to do, recognizing where we're at as a city, and, the zoning being one piece of moving forward, right? So.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So
And if you don't mind, and I appreciate it, I did want to mention that there was a comment that you haven't seen any positive emails or anything. There have been actually some. I don't know who they went to, but we have gotten some. But I will say that in our countless meetings that we continue to have, we have a lot of positive response from, just neighbors that live in a small neighborhood when we engage with them and explain, what we're actually trying to do and clear up some of the information to the development community. We do have a lot of positive, but they don't necessarily send a lot of emails that are going to be flooding you. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's just the nature of it. You're not going to see as many of those, but we hear them and we're continuing to hear them. And so, maybe they'll be here next month to join us. So.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions.
That'd be helpful. And I just hadn't heard anybody to me.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you to y'all from coming down from Chicago, DPD, all the work. Nicholas, I know it's a lot of work. I know you've had hundreds of meetings. I've been to some of them. I've heard, look, this is just this is like eating a whale. Because it's less than it's not really, this is a new UDC. This is not just a change to the UDC. So as a developer, it's just the way I make a living. So I think I'm looking at it in both ways, right? How does the development community and the market affected, and hopefully positively, and how as a planning commissioner are we making good decisions around process? And the map is the map. I think we that's one part of it, but process I think just as important. And so thank you for all the work, guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Thank you. If there are not any further questions, we're going to hear from the public. And